Hey everybody, this is Robot here from Vespa Motorsport here in San Diego, or scooterwest.com, our mail order operations for all things Vespa. Today I'm going to do a brake fluid flush on this GTS 300. You've probably seen this GTS in some of our other videos if you follow our channel. It's essentially a loaner scooter that we allow some of our customers to use. Every 2 years, Piaggio recommends that you change the brake fluid on your scooter, and it's just a good preventive maintenance because brake fluid is it's hydroscopic, so it absorbs water, even though the system's for the most part is pretty sealed. If you haven't changed it for 5 or 6 years, or if there's some reason you need to pull the fork out, you're going to need to know how to do this procedure. But definitely important not to overlook your brake system, and I'm going to show you how to do this pretty simply with just basic tools and not any of the sort of shop tools that we use, such as a vacuum bleeder or pressure bleeder. So of course, if you're doing a brake flush, you're going to need brake fluid. Pretty much all motorcycles and scooters that have been manufactured in the last 20 years always use a .4 brake fluid. We sell a small bottle of EBC .4 brake fluid. Part number on this is oil brake, if you want to order that from our website. You're going to need some basic tools such as an 8mm open-end wrench to open the front brake bleeder. I think the rear on a GTS is going to be a 10. Some of the scooters also use an 11mm wrench. So first of all, you got to gain access to the brake reservoirs, and on the Vespa GTS, they're located under this cover. I'm going to have to remove the windshield. There's going to be a single screw that holds this reservoir cover. If you're working on a 2018 Vespa GTS, which you most likely don't need to do a brake fluid flush, as of this time, recording the video in April 2018, but maybe in 2020 when you're watching this, you need to remove the whole entire cover. They no longer have these covers. On a Primavera Sprint, you want to remove this upper handlebar cover. It's held in place by 4 screws that hold this top cover from the underside, and there's also 2 screws that hold the chrome headlight bezel in place. Once those are removed and the headset top's removed, along with a single connector to the speedometer, you have access to the brake fluid reservoir. The same goes for the Vespa LX or ET models. The brake fluid reservoir for the front brakes is located under the front handlebar half. This front handlebar half removes with 3 screws. And on the Vespa GTV 250 and 300 models, fortunately the brake fluid reservoirs are pretty easy to access. All you need to do is remove the mirrors to expose these covers. On the older brake reservoirs, they didn't have these covers, so they're just out in the open, much like they would be on most motorcycles. And on MP3 models, there's usually a single screw that has a cover that's over top of the brake fluid reservoir you can remove. On this newer MP3, which is I think a 2015 or newer, the brake fluid reservoirs are exposed. And on the Beverly or BV models, they happen to be the most difficult to do a brake fluid flush. You're going to need to remove this rear handlebar half, which requires removal of the windshield, both mirrors, and the various fasteners that hold this back half off, and you'd pull it away, you'd gain access to the reservoirs. So on this GTS model, I'm going to use a 2.5mm Allen wrench to remove the single screw. Take extra care when removing or reinstalling this screw, as the plastic tab that holds the clip is pretty fragile on these models. So once that's exposed, you can carefully lift up the cover. You can see there's 2 little pegs. This one's broken right here, and that's pretty common. Doesn't really affect the operation or how the cover installs. It seems to hold in place just fine with the screw. Go ahead and remove the mirror to get out of the way. You could technically leave the mirror in place and just tape the cover off to the side, but I'm going to remove the mirror. And repeat the same with your rear brake, which is on the left side. Before you remove the brake reservoir covers, you want to make sure everything's clean around there. Kind of inspect the cover. You can see the fluid level with the bubble, it's at the correct level. The only reason the fluid level goes down is as the brake pads wear, or if you have a brake fluid leak, which isn't too likely, and unless the scooter's quite old and some of the seals in the brake system have broken down. Definitely want to take care of those kind of problems, as losing your brakes is a pretty dangerous situation. The number 2 screwdriver, you want to remove the 2 screws. Take extra care not to move the handlebars around, because once you have spilled brake fluid on any of these plastic or painted handlebar parts, it ends up deteriorating the plastic and the paint on these things. Oftentimes these little covers, they're a little bit stuck, and you can take a screwdriver and just carefully pry up the cover. Just from the corner, there's a little bit of area where you can open it up. So carefully pull that up, and that's the original brake fluid from, I think this scooter's a 2014 model year, so it's a couple of years old. Doesn't necessarily look bad. There is a special tester, but with the kind of amber color to it, it's kind of a good indication it's time to change it. I've seen scooters that haven't had fluid changed for 10 years. It looks pretty much like black motor oil, and sometimes you'll feel the braking system doesn't quite operate correctly with bad fluid. The tool that works pretty easy to do this job is tool syringe. It's a nice, just a regular 60 milliliter syringe with a rubber diaphragm. You can pull a vacuum pretty easily with it. Since the brake fluid capacities are quite small on the Vespas, this works pretty ideal. You can also do a 2-man bleed, where somebody breaks open the bleeder and use the action of the brake pump, the master cylinder and the lever, to bleed the fluid just as well. First of all, you just want to suck the remains of any of the bad fluid out of your brake reservoir, and get as much as you can out, and you want to dispose of that in a manner that states we dispose of it into oil capacity. You can see I made one small drop right here. You want to wipe that up immediately. Make sure you don't drop any of the oil down around the master cylinder. If you do, my best suggestion is to put the brake reservoir cap back on and use some soapy water to wash it through here. It's not going to damage anything inside, but you want to make sure you flush away that brake fluid or dilute it quite a bit. One other thing to keep in mind is just do one side at a time. You don't want to have both reservoirs open. Down at the brake caliper itself, you want to inspect your brakes. If the brakes are worn, this is the time to do it before you flush the brakes, because if you install new brakes after you do a brake flush and fill your brake reservoir all the way up with brake fluid, when you push the pistons back in to change out your brake pads, it's going to displace more fluid and overflow the reservoir, possibly cause leakage of brake fluid. So underneath this little rubber cap is the brake bleed nipple. You can either use an open end or a closed end wrench. I'm going to go ahead and put the closed end of an 8mm wrench on there. And right now I just broke it loose, and right now it's just barely snug. With my 60mm syringe, I put a soft, flexible piece of hose on it. You can source this anywhere, or if you want to order it from us, I think it's Fuel Line Tygon. I think this is 3/16 hose, but it happens to fit very nicely over the brake bleeder nipple. The fluid I drained out, I want to make sure the piston's all the way into the brake syringe, or the syringe right here, and I'm going to go up at the top and fill my reservoir. So keep in mind that's closed right now, the brake bleeder. So there's 2 ways to get the brake fluid into the reservoir. Of course, you can carefully pour it into the reservoir, but the safer way is to put fresh brake fluid. This is the brake fluid we use in this shop. We go through this amount every single week. You don't want to leave used brake fluid out, because again, it will absorb moisture just being out and open. But you can put it in a squeeze bottle, much like a ketchup bottle or something, and with the little cap you can carefully pour it so you have no chance of spillage. Obviously when you let go of it, kind of put your finger back over it, but no spillage. It's nice and clean, easy way to add brake fluid to the scooter. And if you're not very confident, you can just rest this on top. Don't put the screws in, because it will pull the rubber diaphragm as you pull a vacuum. You need to have this reservoir open when we pull a vacuum to extract the fluid. So I'm going to go ahead and break the bleeder open, and you're going to get a combination of both bubbles because the brake bleeder allows bubbles to go in, but you can kind of watch the fluid level. Yeah, I'm going to pull maybe 20 milliliters, 20 cc's of fluid, and then you could double check your reservoir, make sure you're not going dry. But it pulled about half the capacity out of the brake reservoir. You want to keep this topped off because once you get air in the system, it's going to be much more difficult to bleed. And another thing to have by your side is somewhere to drain this fluid. The other option is you could just open this up and just keep on pulling out. And I'm going to keep on pulling fluid until this is not quite this amber color, but closer to the color of this bottle where it's a very light yellow. And before you drain this, you want to close the valve. And you can just close it lightly. And I can even leave some of the fluid in there. Oops, don't want to spray it on the bike, just to displace the air. And you can see right now I've pulled about 22 milliliters of fluid. Again, you know, I kind of sprayed a little bit of fluid. Got to make sure you're not going to I can already tell the fluid's getting pretty dry, or a little clearer now that I pulled some through. So drain the old fluid into the thing. The syringe has been reset. And I'm going to go ahead and pull. It's kind of getting more air than it's. You know, be careful not to drip fluid onto your rim. So you can see the reservoir is pretty low. You want to make sure your lever is firm and there's no air bubbles in the system. And that's with the bleeder closed. And you want to carefully take this and fill it right up to about that point. It's just right at the top of the sight glass right there. So we'll clean the top of the brake reservoir, and the same with the cap. You know, clean the whole edge of it, the sealing surface. And we'll go ahead and put the cap on there. You don't want to fill that reservoir any higher than what I have it there because it's likely to seep out of the cover. Because when you put the cover on it, it displaces some of the fluid. So install the 2 screws. Don't need to go too tight on the screws here. And you can see in the window, it's very clear now. On the much newer models with ABS, it's a little bit more difficult to do a brake flush. You want to absolutely make sure you get no air into the system. Otherwise, you'll need the dealer tools to bleed the air out of the ABS pump. So just keep in mind with an ABS bike, you're going to want to flush a lot more brake fluid through and not allow any air to go. You know, you don't want the reservoir to ever go all the way empty. So I showed you one way to do a brake bleed with just a simple basic tool such as a syringe like this. There's a couple other ways to bleed the brakes. If you have 2 people doing it, you can have one person monitoring the brake reservoir and a small section of hose at the brake bleeder, and also the wrench on the brake bleeder. And you can coordinate with that second person. Whenever you have the brake bleeder open, they can pull the lever, and then before you release the brake lever, you close the bleeder and you let the lever go and carefully pump the brakes back up, and do that several times to flush out the brake fluid. I found that's not the most effective way to do it. I know it works, you know, it's a pretty common do-it-yourself way of doing brake flushes on a automobile, but the scooters, it doesn't work all that well. It's best to have some source of vacuum, such as something as simple as this syringe to a tool that we use in the service department. This uses air to build a vacuum and has a reservoir to capture the brake fluid. And I'm going to show you how this tool works. I don't expect most do-it-yourselfers to have a tool like this. There is less expensive versions that are hand pumps. You know, they call it, I think the trade name for one of them is a Mighty Vac. But this one runs off air, and it's a very effective way of flushing the brake system out on a scooter very quickly. So on this GTS, on the rear brakes, there's a little rubber cap on there. And I'm going to go ahead and put a 10mm wrench on the brake bleeder. And I went ahead and cracked it real quick, and right now it's just hand tight. I can easily loosen that. So you want to crack the excessive force. I'm going to hook the vacuum line from the brake bleeder onto the vacuum bleed, or on the brake bleeder nipple right there. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the air-operated brake bleeder back on, so it's going to build a vacuum on the brake nipple, and you can see that the brake fluid is probably going down quite rapidly. Not so rapid. Sometimes it goes a little bit more. Sometimes you can do 1 or 2 pumps on it to kind of help get it going. You want to watch it. Right when it's about empty, I'm going to go ahead and start adding brake fluid to it. And the idea, I could have cleared out the reservoir, but I'm just pulling all the old brake fluid right through the thing. So using the new fluid to essentially flush through the old stuff. And pretty much like about a minute of this, you can see how clear the fluid is right now. You know, probably overdone it, but I'll go ahead and just fill it one more time, and I'm going to go over to the brake bleeder nipple and go ahead and close that. And you can see I stopped it right at the right level. It's right at the top of the brake sight glass. You want to take care when you're pulling the lever with the reservoir open. Sometimes it will squirt, you know, upset the fluid a little bit. Lever's perfectly hard. Clean the cap, clean rag. You know, obviously pull away from the reservoir. You don't want to have any small particles drop into the brake reservoir. But with the automatic brake bleeder, I'm all done. So make sure the bleed nipple's tight. You don't want to over tighten it because it is a hollow shaft. Screw threads, it's pretty prone to breaking if you over tighten it. Then put the rubber cap back on. One last thing to do, that's a good maintenance thing, is to add a little bit of grease to the brake pivots. You could go as far as taking the lever off, but this is a sticky you know, grease. That's a spray-on type of grease, and both the lever pin and the point that actuates the plunger on the brakes are both just bare metal. There's no type of bearing in them or anything, so it gives you a much smoother operation when you have that all lubed up. So that pretty much concludes on doing a brake fluid flush. Like I said, every 2 years is a good idea to do that, especially if the scooter's parked outside where it's exposed to the elements. If it's in a garage, you could probably get away with 4 or 5 years. Definitely a good idea to change it out. It's good preventive maintenance along with doing the other regular maintenance that goes along with the scooter, you know, such as oil change, servicing the belt, checking your valves, replacing the tires as needed, and along with changing out the brake pads or shoes. Hope everybody enjoys those little videos I put together. Check out our YouTube channel if you haven't subscribed. I think we have well over 350 videos up there now, mostly related to servicing your modern Vespas. I have a number of videos on the vintage Vespas, along with all the fun accessories we sell here at scooterwest.com. Follow us on Instagram, Vespa Motorsport. You can follow me on Instagram, Robot Vespa. Until next time, Robot here.